Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, was dropped yesterday morning at 6 a.m. Geoff Mosher, Adam Kaplan, and, of course, all of their Eagles training camp coverage over at InsideTheBirds.com. Andrew DeCecco yesterday, Adam Kaplan on Wednesday, and Geoff Mosher is back for a Friday edition. Geoff, how you doing today?
I'm good, Josh. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So this morning, Jonathan Gannon spoke a very condensed 12-minute session, unlike the marathon that Howie and Sirianni had a couple days ago. I want to start with this with Gannon. I thought it was interesting when Gannon talked about the veterans, because this is something that you and Adam have talked about as well on the Inside the Birds podcast, which is, guys like Anthony Harris, the fans are like, he's a bum, he shouldn't be on the... But, Gannon is explaining these veterans are here to translate some of this stuff. They're almost coaches for the other players. I think that's a very important thing to bring into this conversation, because there have been a lot of additions this offseason. So guys like White, guys like, Jaquaski Tart is a veteran, but a lot of these guys never played in this kind of system before. So how important is it for the other guys to help those guys get up to speed?
Yeah, the Eagles have brought in a lot of veterans and guys who have played in different schemes and different behind different fronts for the secondary. And, he sort of talked about in Minnesota how everyone sees Harrison Smith as this movable chess piece who's, excellent at what he does and helps the Vikings, or at least did under Zimmer, help them do a lot of disguise and in their coverages. But he said that wouldn't be possible if Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr weren't also able to fulfill their responsibilities. And so he talks about having all the veterans here on the Eagles defense. The Eagles defense is not a young defense, Josh. It's probably more older than it is younger. You're talking about guys like Anthony Harris and Jaquaski Tart, Bradbury and Slayer, both over 30. Fletcher Cox has been around for a long time. Brandon Graham's been around for quite a while. So, they've got a Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean, but for the most part, it's an older defense, guys who have been through a lot, seen a lot. So they should be able to pick up on what Jonathan Gannon wants to do in year two. The question that you always have when you have that kind of an older defense is, where does everybody fit? Can everybody stay healthy? And is everybody still as productive? Can they be as productive as they were 3 or 4 or 5 years ago?
You mentioned the point he made about, what it was like in Minnesota. And I thought it was interesting that Gannon believes that everyone on this defense right now can play the roles needed to do what they did similar in Minnesota. You mentioned Harrison Smith, about how he was like, Smith can't do what he does without Andrew Sendejo and without Anthony Barr. So do you agree with his assessment that the Eagles have the players now to do those kind of things?
I think they have the players now to be more versatile in what they want to do. But I don't necessarily know yet that they can fulfill everything that he wants to do, or that he's going to be able to build a defense that completely caters to all their strengths. I think that's yet to be determined. Yeah, I think there are some things that he said about that didn't jibe, or don't hold up the smell test. For example, Hassan Reddick is a guy who gives them flexibility because Reddick has played in several types of fronts. But really what he's done the best the last 2 years is be a stand-up edge rusher in a 34-like front. When you are that guy, though, that sometimes you have to drop into coverage. And, sources who have seen him play in both Carolina and Arizona have told me that he is not a guy you want covering, whether it's man zone, dropping or running. It's just not his strength, and it's a weakness. And Jonathan said that he feels his coverage is a strength. And I just have to think that Jonathan was just feeding lines on that one. So I'm not 100%. I think that there are some real question marks about how they can execute and accomplish what they might want to do based on the front that they're showing, Josh, without getting too football jargony. But there's going to be times where they have a 5-man line because they're trying to stop the run, and the offense is going to check out into a pass. And at that point, does Jonathan want to keep that look and have Hassan Reddick be the 5th rusher? Or does he want Hassan Reddick dropping into coverage? So basically you're blitzing or you're covering. And, when you're blitzing, then you're leaving holes and voids in other areas, and you have to play a specific defense behind that. So it'll all be for him to figure out, and I don't know that if the Eagles are going to be good enough to pull that all off.
I'm going to seal right at the end there. I was going to go somewhere else, but you said something right. You don't know if. Well, that's a big if, Geoff, because wasn't the whole point of Howie making all these moves? Bradbury, White, Reddick, drafting Jonathan Davis, drafting Nakobe Dean. Wasn't the whole point was Gannon didn't have the personnel last year to do what he wanted. Now Howie went shopping for him and said, I bought all the things you want. Now make the dinner. If Gannon can't make the dinner, that's a huge problem.
It will be a problem for Jonathan Gannon if this defense isn't improved, if he doesn't figure out the right schemes and coverages to match what the offense is trying to do against him. And then that's always a cat and mouse game. It's a game within the game, but then it's also a game each and every week as your film and tape develops for your opponents to use against you. So he certainly has more versatile players. He talked about that. It's obvious. But having versatile players and having really good and talented players and having the acumen on your own self as a coordinator to be able to put players in position to succeed is all the question, yes, you go out and get players, but they're not all perfect, right? For example, we just talked about Hassan Reddick. He's an edge rusher, but he struggles in coverage. Well, how are you going to mask his struggles in coverage when you put him out there? Because you're paying him to play the full game. So you put him out there, you use him as an overhang player, and all of a sudden the team wants to start passing on you. Well, that puts him in either a rush or a coverage position. So if you're just going to rush him, then what are you doing with the rest of your defense? So, that's the cat and mouse stuff that Jonathan Gannon has to figure out.
Football at 4, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, joining us, talking reactions to Jonathan Gannon's comments this morning, as well as the latest from Eagles training camp. A couple more things on the defense before we move on, Geoff. I want to ask you, they brought up the point in the presser with Gannon about, hey, you brought in Jaquiski Tart. What does that mean? And Gannon didn't really give a legitimate answer. He gave one of those, wishy-washy, oh, he's a great player, blah, blah, blah. But I think deep down, Gannon realizes that there's a possibility that even though Anthony Harris is his guy, that Tart might just be the better option when they start the season.
Yeah, and, it's not that I wonder about Anthony Harris being his guy. I do. I mean, I know he played for him, but so did Eric Wilson last year, who was the linebacker that they signed because Eric had played in Minnesota, and Eric got cut halfway through the year because he just wasn't playing well. Anthony Harris was a guy who played okay. He was steady. He didn't help you. He didn't hurt you. I mean, he may have hurt you a little, but he may have helped you at times a little. He just was a guy. Kind of had a vanilla year. So Jaquiski Tart, when healthy, is a guy who's played at a pretty high level, but he's always struggled to stay healthy. So I think it's fair to wonder if at some point there's a changing of the guard there, or safety. If Jaquiski Tart is healthy and plays better or outplays Anthony Harris, which, to be honest, shouldn't be difficult to do, but it's not like Jaquiski Tart's a spring chicken either. So, if anything, Marcus Epps is the guy to be excited about in the secondary because at least he's getting an extended look and you're going to get to see him play and see what he can do.
Imagine saying that a couple of years ago. Epps is the guy to get excited about. Like, if you would have said that to an Eagles fan in 2019, Geoff, they would have been asking where your house is so they could throw tomatoes at your house. Now, all these years later, Epps actually looks like a legitimate starting safety.
Yeah, it's funny you say in 2019 because at the end of that season is when they played Seattle in the playoff game, and it was DK Metcalf's 45-yard catch where he toasted Marcus Epps that basically set up the game winner for Seattle in that game. So yes, he's come pretty far, Marcus Epps, but it's also sort of a sign of what the Eagles have at safety, that Marcus Epps, an undrafted free agent who's on his second team and only played as a package player last year, is the guy to be excited about at the safety position.
Yeah. Meanwhile, DK Metcalf just got $30 million guaranteed, and You know,
Right.
I feel like that's more like hush money than anything else because Seattle's gonna have a horrible year probably this year. So
Probably. Probably.
Geoff, I want to loop you into some of the conversations we've been having since the last time you and I talked earlier this week. Now that camp actually started, we have, people on the field, bodies in the building. Is there too much hyping up from the coaches and the players about Jalen Hurts?
I mean, is there too much hyping up? What do you expect them to not hype him up? He's the starting quarterback. So, I mean.
Well, I just feel like there's a fine line between, like, you don't want to be Tyreek Hill and sound like you're trying to convince yourself what you're saying about Tua Tagovailoa. On the flip side, I look at the Eagles and, like, Sirianni's wearing the shirt and A.J. Brown is saying how, Jalen Hurts is the greatest. And it's like, yeah, you're his best friend. Yeah, you're his coach. Like, what are you supposed to say, like you said? So, like, I'm almost like, I'm kind of having trouble, like, digesting some of this because some of it, how fans are. They eat this stuff up like it's, candy.
Yeah, well, I guess I would say is I don't think anything that's been said or has been way over the top. I mean, you can point to Nick Sirianni wearing the Jalen Hurts shirt, but he wears everybody's shirt. I mean, that's like his whole wardrobe is, cartoon character shirts of his players. So it doesn't surprise me. But I would say like two things can be true. The Eagles can do the right thing and have the back of Jalen Hurts, which is the right thing to do, and sing his praises. And fans can be skeptical about it because of what they saw the last time that the team was on the field. So it's fair on both sides.
Do you think that what is okay? Let me rephrase this because I asked this question to Checo yesterday, and he gave me the classic Checo. That's a good question, answer before he answered for about 2 minutes. So I want to ask you, what is a realistic, fair expectation for Jalen Hurts and this offense this year?
Are you asking me from a statistical standpoint? Like what context are you looking for?
I'm looking for something that because the fan needs something tangible. It might not be statistical always, but it's something where, like, hey, it's week 8 and you're on Football at 4, or you're doing the Inside the Birds podcast, and you're saying, all right, it's week 8. Jalen Hurts, the Eagles offense has done this, and it's a good or bad thing.
Yeah, so I think the reasonable expectation for this year's offense is to morph from what they were at the second half of last year, which was a run-heavy offense, into a more pass-centric. It doesn't have to be pass-heavy. They don't have to be the Chiefs, okay, even though that they've always admired to be. But they've got to be able to throw the ball early in the game and build the lead through the air. They have dynamic weapons with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. They have some running backs who can catch the ball and do things after the catch when they get it. And both Kenny Gainwell and when Miles Sanders does catch the ball, he can do those things. So they have plenty of weapons. They need to be able to score at least 26 points a game. I think that's a fair average for them. I didn't look at last year's top teams, but I imagine 26 points per game would be something in the top 10 of offense. I'll go back and look, but maybe 25 to 26. So, and yeah, they need to be able to, and I think with Jalen, he needs to be efficient. He needs to be in the mid 60s as far as completion percentage, 64, 65, it would be fine. Above that would be even better. More touchdowns than interceptions by far, which he was good at doing last year. And I think the run element will obviously always be a part of Jalen Hurts' game, and just not as much as it was last year. He needs to show better pocket presence and not getting out of the pocket at the perception of presence, not necessarily, or the illusion of pressure, I should say, not the actual pressure. You know what I'm saying? Meaning it has to be real pressure. Can't just sort of feel it.
Right. You don't want to be Sam Darnold seeing ghosts out there. So
there you go. There you go.
By the way, to your point, the Eagles were 25th last year in passing yards and passing touchdowns, but they were number 1 in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. So, what you're talking about, if I'm interpolating it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're saying take that 25 and make it closer to like 12th in the league, and then maybe the running can be 12th as well or 10th as well, and make sure it's maybe like more like a 60-40 split instead of the other direction.
Sounds good to me. Yes, that's what I'm basically saying. Again, they don't have to be Kansas City. They don't have to be, the Patriots under Aaron Rodgers when he's winning MVP, but they've got to be a better passing offense, a much better passing offense.
You mentioned Miles Sanders earlier. I want to ask you about him because one of the listeners this week was asking me this week that, with all the focus being on Hurts, is it wrong in thinking there needs to be just as much focus on Miles Sanders because of where he is with his contract and his role with his team long term?
Sure. Well, you're saying, is it fair to wonder where Miles is going, what his future is?
Right, because they haven't given him an extension, so
right.
I think there's a question out there of, I know you and Adam have talked about on the podcast, the Eagles love Kenny Gainwell. Well,
right.
Kenny Gainwell is a well-liked guy, but I think part of it is why they like him is because Sanders has not gotten to what he was that rookie year when he was like, oh man, this guy can run, he can catch, and then it was the soft tissue injuries, and then it was the drop passes, and then it was people wondering, asking Nick Sirianni, like, is Sanders part of the offense? And Sirianni said, of course he's part of the offense last year. I remember those weird questions at the press conferences.
I know. It's the whole Miles Sanders career has been odd so far, but I mean, he's a big part of the team. I still think at this moment, he is their best running back. He is healthy. He's a dynamic running back. Don't think people realize maybe that last year, he and Nick Chubb led all NFL running backs in yards per carry with 5.5. And I don't know if you do the quick math, that's 5.5. If you're starting off and you get 5.5 yards for carry and first down, and you're at 2nd and 5 or 2nd and 4, that gives your offense a whole lot of great possibilities for run, pass, or a run action, play action, anything you want to do. I think he's a good running back who has flaws. And I will say that the coaching staff, though, picked Kenny Gainwell, and that seems to be their guy. So I believe that this running game will be a 2-person running game. It will be Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell as long as they're both healthy. And if someone gets hurt, then Boston Scott enters the equation. I believe Miles Sanders will get a lot of chances and opportunities because he is their best running back, but they will look to get Kenneth Gainwell more involved. And if Miles Sanders does not show improvement in some of the other areas, pass protection, blitz pickup, or can't stay healthy, or if he fumbles, which he's also been prone to do, then Kenneth Gainwell will get more opportunities there.
He's Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter. Of course, latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast dropped Thursday morning. Full coverage of Eagles training camp over at InsideTheBirds.com. And the next pod drops Monday morning at 6 a.m., correct?
That's correct.
All right, Jeff.
You got it all right there, Josh.
I'm trying to keep up. It's been one of those weeks. So, Geoff Mosher, appreciate you jumping on, and we will catch up with you in some capacity on Monday because, well, as I've learned in this business, you never say confirm anything. So,
correct. Have a great weekend, Josh.